Hello friends, my name is Jess and welcome back to my channel, Books Past Bedtime, and welcome to day number 1 of VLOGMAS. Today we are kicking things off with my November wrap-up. Now, I am filming this on November 29th, so technically anything could happen in the next 36 hours, but I feel like I will probably only finish one more book, if that, before the end of the month, so I think we're pretty safe to go ahead and film this. So let's just hop into it. And first things first, we are going to talk about my reading stats for the month of November. So in November, as I mentioned, I read a total of 15 books. I did want it to be a little bit higher, but I was kind of busy this month. In the beginning of the month, I had a little bit of a Disney World vacation, so that half week I didn't read anything at all, so I think that really set me back. But I did read some long books this month, so I feel like that quite makes up for it. As you can see in my page count, I read a total of 5,260 pages this month. I also listened to about 30 hours and 15 minutes of audiobooks, and my average rating for the month was a 3.46, which is a little low, but I am working on some secret TBR, so that's kind of the reason why. They're books that I was interested in but kind of knew going in weren't going to be 5 stars, so I feel like that drug down my total a little bit for the month, but that's okay. I did read some really good books this month as well, so that made up for it. All right, let's take a look at the genres that I read in November. So of course, the largest genre, as always, is romance, coming in at 10 total books, and then I read 4 fantasy books and 1 sci-fi. In terms of the format of my books, I listened to 2 audiobooks, read 8 ebooks, and read 5 books physically. In terms of the audience of my books, I read 8 adult books, 3 new adult books, and 4 YA books. Looking at my author identity, I read 13 books by women, I read 1 book by a man, and then I read 1 book by a transgender author. My author status stats are kind of interesting this month. I didn't read any debut books that I know of, and then there was a pretty even split between books by authors that I had read before and books by authors that were new to me. And then we can break down my average 3.46 rating a little bit further. I did rate 1 single book 5 stars this month, and it's funnily enough not the number 1 best book that I read this month according to my ranking. I'll explain that when we get to it. My brain just works like that. I don't know. But then I also rated 1 book 4.5 stars. I rated 6 books 4 stars, which is pretty solid. 1 book got a 3.5 star rating. 2 books got 3-star ratings. 1 book got a 2.5 star rating. 1 book got a 2-star rating. 1 book got a 1-star rating. And I did DNF 1 book this month as well. So my ratings were pretty much all over the board this month, as you can see, which is how I got a very average rating. But yes, I think that is all for my reading stats for November, so let's go ahead and jump into wrapping up the books that I actually read. As I've been doing pretty much all year, I think I'm going to be ranking the books that I read in November from worst to best. So I'm going to talk about the worst books first and lead up to the very best book that I read this month. So make sure you stick around to the end of the video to find out what that best book of the month is. So let's just hop right into it. We will obviously be starting off with the book that I DNF'd this month, and that is Sailing with Her Wolf by Ariel Marie. If you've been around my channel this year and watched previous wrap-ups, you know that I kind of got into shifter romances around the summertime, and up until now I've been reading a lot of male Achillean shifter romances, but I around here read all kinds of queer books, so I really wanted to find some sapphic versions of shifter romances, and this is the first one I tried because I thought it was pretty well liked and it was recommended to me on KU, but it was not it was not a successful first foray into this subgenre niche, if you will. This book follows Marley and Zara. Marley is a wolf shifter, Zara is a human, but they are best friends, and Marley has always been in love with Zara to the point of she knows that Zara is her one true mate, but Zara has always been straight and not interested in Marley as more than a friend. But then Zara breaks up with her boyfriend, and so Marley devises this girls trip for her to get away, forget about her boyfriend. So they go sailing on this yacht that Marley's family has, and the very first night they're out at sea, they get caught in a storm and they get cut off from the real world. They are lost, they don't know where they are, so Marley really steps into this alpha protective kind of role. Zara, I think within this, realizes that Marley is her mate, and they get together. This is a pretty short book, and I did end up DNFing it at the 37% mark because I just was not feeling it. The writing is so amateurish that I was just rolling my eyes the entire time. It's also a very, very sexually charged book, which is fine, but it's not my cup of tea. Don't get me wrong, like the level of smut is not the problem. It's the smut with the lack of like emotions and feelings and fluff that I don't like. I am reading the romance for like the attraction, for the pining, for the angst. I'm not necessarily reading it for the smut. That's just an added like lovely bonus. Because this book didn't have the fluff and the like relationship building behind the smut, I didn't love it. And I just found the writing to be really difficult to read. It was just, like I said, very amateurish. So that was why I ended up DNFing this book. And it's definitely not one that I would recommend. My next least favorite book that I read in November is unfortunately another sapphic romance, and that is When Tara Met Farah by Tara Pammy. This is a sapphic opposites attract, grumpy sunshine kind of romance. It's a novella. It's super short, and I just feel like it didn't have enough time to hit its stride. So this book follows Tara, who is a 19-year-old YouTuber. She still lives at home with her parents, and her mom every year kind of takes on a student, like exchange student program kind of thing every summer because she's a professor at a college. And so she brings a student to study with her over like winter break or over summer break. I believe this book takes place over summer break. And so Farah comes to live in Tara's house, and they immediately kind of don't like each other. Tara has a strained relationship with her mother, and she's jealous of any kind of student who has a like better relationship with her mother than Tara does herself. So there's tension between them. Tara's also like naturally a very bubbly, outgoing person, whereas Farah is very like quiet and reserved. So they just are kind of opposites. There's some tension going on, but that tension kind of bubbles into this attraction and this romance and this fling that these two have. While I liked the concept of the story on paper and like I really enjoyed the elements of food and culture that the story brought in, never found myself feeling Tara and Farah's romance. I had similar issues with this to the issues that I had with Sailing with Her Wolf, and that the writing just never felt like it hit its stride. It again felt very amateurish. There were so many instances where I was just rolling my eyes because this book had a lot of telling not showing going on, which is difficult to wrap my head around. Like I was told a million times that Tara was this bubbly sunshiny person, but so many times she was like being mean. Like what I was shown didn't vibe with what I was told. So there was this dissonance going on in the writing that I couldn't get over. I also had some difficulty with some of the specific word choices and pet names that the characters were calling each other. I felt like they were overused and cringy. And then all of that combined to make me not be able to like feel a romance. So I ended up rating this book 2 stars, and I just didn't feel it. I feel like this needed another rewrite, some more editing, and then it would have been a lot more successful. Next in my lineup is another book with unfortunately amateurish writing, and that is My Heart to Find by Elin Annalise. This is a contemporary romance between two asexual characters, so I was super excited to see that representation in romance. I always love reading about asexual characters, but this book just unfortunately did not do it for me. This book follows Kara and Damien and their second chance romance. They originally met on this retreat for asexual people quite a few years ago, but since then they have lost contact, mostly because Kara was too shy and anxious to contact Damien again once they left this retreat. And in the years since, Kara has developed chronic Lyme, so she's dealing with this chronic illness as well as OCD as a result from this chronic illness. So she's got a lot going on, but then Damien shows up again in her life. He moves to her town and they kind of reconnect, and Kara really wants to pursue something with Damien, but she's having a lot of trouble coming to terms with how their relationship might look different now than it would have like 3 or 4 years ago. And Damien still has a thing for Kara, but he can see that she is different and she's kind of grappling with whether she wants to let him in or not. They have this conflict going on. In the background, there's also this true crime murder mystery plotline happening about a case that is going on in their town. Damien and Kara reconnect over trying to solve this mystery. So I did like that mystery element, but unfortunately the rest of it just, again, never hit its stride. The writing in this book just really took away from the potential of the story. I think the bones were there to have something good, and the writing just didn't do what it was trying to do. I just really didn't find myself connecting to the story or the characters very much, or really caring what happened to them, because I just couldn't get into the story because of the writing. It was an enjoyable enough read, and I wouldn't necessarily steer anyone away from reading it, especially because it's a short, quick story to get through, but it's just definitely not making any favorites of the year's list for me, and I ended up giving this book 2.5 stars. Now, the next couple books on this list are all kind of my middle of the road 3 to 4 star reads, and I feel like in a different mood I could be persuaded to put these in a different order. So the books that I just talked about were definitely my bottom 3, and I definitely have a top 3 of the month, but everything in the middle is kind of wishy-washy. So take these reviews as you will. If any of these books sound interesting, they're definitely probably worth the read, and I don't know that this is necessarily my set in stone ranking, but yeah, this is just the order that I put them in my current mood. So the next book I want to talk about is This I Promise You by Jordan Green and Caleb Daniel. This is a new adult college romance between Easton and Paul. They go to college together, and it's kind of a bad first impression sort of thing where they meet at this bar and have a misunderstanding and end up kind of hating each other as a result from it, even though they're both kind of pretty attracted to one another. But they have mutual friends in common, so they keep getting into these situations where they're interacting again with one another, and eventually they both kind of give in to the fact that they are really attracted to one another, and maybe their first impressions of one another were skewed, were incorrect, and so they decide to start dating and giving things a shot. But both boys have like lots of baggage from their life. Easton is dealing with a chronic illness, and Paul is dealing with the trauma of childhood abuse, so definitely big trigger warnings for that. But they both kind of have to try and figure out how they can make a relationship between themselves work and how they can trust one another with these issues that they're dealing with. Overall, I really liked this story. It was a little bit stilted in the writing department when the book started, so it took me like a little bit to get into it, but once I got into it, I did find myself really caring about these characters, liking learning about them and how their relationship worked and like rooting for them. But I just couldn't get myself to go all in on this book, and I think it again lies in the writing. I don't know why I read so many books that I struggled with the writing with this month, but I did, and this was also one of them. I think my biggest problem was that some of these chapters in this book were written like diary entries. Like when they started, they were like, oh, work is going well this week. Oh, classes are hard. Like I was like, I don't care. The prose was so strange because it felt like I was being talked at or like written to instead of just being able to be immersed in the story. So I didn't love that. Also, there were so many scenes that were just like ridiculous and over the top, and a lot of the dialogue was so unrealistic. No one talks like that. Those things frustrated me. And then the third act breakup was just so ridiculous and over the top. I don't know that it was necessarily unforgivable, but I thought the way that it was handled was really strange. Like I really thought Paul should have been doing a lot more groveling, whereas Easton kind of like took on the blame himself and blamed himself, which no. Honey, no, that was not the right way to go. There was just some dissonance, and I didn't love the writing, and so I couldn't completely fall in love with the story, even though I feel like it had a lot of good elements. So again, this was a pretty middle of the road read for me. Solid 3 stars though. All right, next I'm gonna list a duo of books. I feel like I probably should have put these below This I Promise You, but honestly I liked them more personally, even though I would recommend them less to other people. But that is this like little boys club duology series thing that I read by Luna David. The first one was called Let Me In, and the second one was called Trust in Me. This is a series of daddy kink age gap romance books, and it is what it is. I feel like with these books, there's really not a lot to say. I rated them both 3 stars. I think I liked the first one slightly more. And actually, I technically think I gave the first one 3.5 stars. Like, you read these books for the dynamic and the smut, and the reason why I knocked some stars off of them is because a lot of the smut happens off page. What's the point of this? You know? Some of them happened on page, don't get me wrong, but some of them didn't. And the books are like kind of long, and the conflicts are kind of drug out for them not to be resolved with a sex scene, you feel me? So that's why these aren't like the greatest books ever, but I mean, they were a fun time. If you like that kind of thing, sure, I would recommend them, but I know that it's not everyone's thing, so I'm not going to talk about these for that much longer, but they were okay. You know, they were fine. Same kind of deal with the next book, although I did like this one a bit better, I would say, but that is Precious by Ro Horvat, I think is how you say their name. This is an age gap Omegaverse romance, and it follows Travis and Micah. Travis is a bit of a loner. He hides in his remote chalet in the mountains and tries not to interact with people too often. One day while he's out walking around, he finds Micah unconscious on this riverbank, and he's like, oh my god, I need to help this kid. So he takes him back to his chalet. Turns out Micah was trying to escape this horrible situation, but he's also about to go into his first heat. So, with Travis being an alpha, this is an issue. Contrary to what it might sound, this book, well, not contrary to what it might sound, because this was definitely the smuttiest, filthiest, dirtiest book I've ever read in my entire goddamn life. But it also, surprisingly enough, was like a super sweet, fluffy romance also. It was kind of the best of both worlds, not gonna lie. It was definitely good for what it was. I gave it 3.75 stars just because it wasn't anything revolutionary or that I would recommend to other people, but I liked it. I definitely liked other books more this month, but it was pretty good. Next in my ranking, I probably would put my reread of Eclipse by Stephanie Meyer. This is the third book in the Twilight Saga where Bella the human falls in love with Edward the vampire. In this book, the love triangle comes to a head. There is a big fight with Victoria and the newborn vampires. This actually is my least favorite in the series. It is only a 4-star read for me, and I really hate Jacob in this book, and I hate that he sexually assaults Bella and abuses her, in my opinion. And honestly, it should be everyone's opinion. It kind of baffles me that this was allowed, and like we all thought it was okay when we were 12, because it's very far from okay. Very far from okay. I also don't think any of these books compared to Twilight, because I feel like that one went through the most rewrites, the most editing, and the writing in that one is actually really good, whereas the writing in these are just pretty basic. They're not bad, but they're just basic, you know? Whereas I think the first one actually is genuinely really good. And I do enjoy these books. They have such a good nostalgia factor for me, but this one is my least favorite in the series, so it's going middle of the road in my ranking list. Not middle of the road, though, was my reread of The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner by Stephanie Meyer. This book follows Bree Tanner, as you might guess, who is one of the newborn vampires that's created for Victoria's army in Eclipse. And this book basically just follows like a couple days in her life right before the fight, her perspective of the fight. And my question is just, what is the point? I ended up rating this book 1 star, so it definitely should go towards the bottom of my ranking, but I just wanted to keep it with Eclipse because it's kind of just an extension of Eclipse. But as itself, as its own entity, it sucks. It's very boring. Literally nothing happens, and we all know like the ending of it. So I just don't understand what the point of this book was. Stephanie could have literally chosen any other character to get a novella, and it would have been more interesting. I really still think we should get a Leah book. Like I'm obsessed with Leah, and I want to see her have a happy ending, but Bree Tanner, I really could give less of a shit about. The next book on my list is kind of surprising for me because I would have thought it would have been higher, especially since I've already read it once before. But that is Call Down the Hawk by Maggie Stiefvater. I did a reread of this book so that I can read Grey Warren, like the newest and final book in this trilogy. But this first book, not as good as I remembered. This series is a spin-off of Maggie Stiefvater's The Raven Cycle series. And this book in particular follows Ronan's story, who is one of the characters in The Raven Cycle. And Ronan has the ability to dream. And this is more than just like we dream. Ronan can actually physically manifest things from his dreams into the real world. There are weird things going on around people with this power because there is this like quasi-government group that believes dreamers are going to bring about the end of the world, so they are out on this quest to eliminate all the dreamers. So Ronan is in direct danger, and we also meet another character named Jordan Hennessy, and Hennessy and Ronan kind of find each other and team up to save dreamer kind, basically. This book, though, is a ton of exposition for the rest of the series, I would assume, and that it's really just setting up this conflict that I just described to you over 472 pages. It's pretty long for no reason, and while I really love Maggie Stiefvater's writing and could just read it for infinity, at the core of it, nothing really happens in this book. I do really love Ronan as a character, which is why I'm reading this series, and enjoy the perspectives of Ronan's brothers as well, particularly Declan. I really think that I like Declan a lot more than I did the first time I read this book. I feel like I understand him more now that I'm older. I also really like Jordan Hennessy. She's such an interesting character, but we spend a lot of this time with this other character named Carmen, and Carmen is part of this quasi-government group that's trying to exterminate the dreamers. While I understand why we get her perspective so that we can understand what's going on with them, I think we get too much of her perspective because this book kind of equally splits perspectives between Carmen, Hennessy, and Ronan, and I just really don't think we needed to spend so much time with Carmen because her perspective is boring, and I don't feel like it adds as much to the story as it should. I really think if we had cut down on her perspective a lot, we could have shortened this book, made it snappier and like more interesting. I don't know. I feel like I'm talking very negatively about this, which I gave it 4 stars. I really like it. I just think it could have been more exciting. And I think it should have been more exciting, but I don't know. Exciting and fast-paced isn't really Maggie Stiefvater's style, so I think I'm asking too much, but I just wanted some more from this, you know? I liked it less than I liked it the first time I read it. Next in my ranking is a bit of surprise for me, and that is Her Royal Happiness by Lola Keeley. This is a female-female contemporary romance between Princess Alice, who is the out and proud lesbian princess of England, I think, and then opinionated, royal-hating Sarah. They have an encounter one day while Princess Alice is at Sarah's daughter's school doing like a reading or a speech or something. Sarah ends up yelling at Princess Alice and their interaction goes viral. So kind of to do some damage control, and also because she's kind of interested in Sarah, Princess Alice invites Sarah and her daughter to like this royal tea thing that they have. They have more interactions. It comes up that Sarah is a like early childhood education specialist, works with special needs children, kind of career lady. So she's kind of brought onto the royal staff in order to evaluate Alice's brother's kid tested for potentially autism, and they really don't want this getting out. They want to give this child the privacy that he deserves. So they hatch up this fake dating plan that Princess Alice is going to fake date Sarah to explain her presence around the castle. And of course, this turns into a real romance and a real attraction. I ended up really enjoying this romance though. I felt like it was a really realistic and like healthy portrayal of what would happen in the situation. And I really enjoyed the fact that the author wasn't afraid to talk about true issues and things that these two likely would fundamentally disagree on based on their stances and political views. I mean, we talked about like colonialism, the British military, things like that, which I thought were super interesting and good inclusions. And I feel like it would have definitely not made sense for those things to not be included and discussed between the two. So I don't know, I really enjoyed that. I also really loved Princess Alice's interactions with Sarah's daughter. I just love when somebody has a kid and like their partner interacts with their kid in such like a sweet way. I don't know. The writing was also really good. The romance was sweet, realistic build. I really enjoyed it. There really wasn't a lot of negative to say about this book. I really just across the board thought it was a good solid read. I gave it a 4-star. Only reason it didn't get like a 5-star or a higher rating was just because I didn't feel that spark, you know, I didn't feel a 5-star spark. So it didn't get a 5-star. Got a solid 4-star, but I really enjoyed this book and would wholeheartedly recommend it. Next in my ranking, I'm going to put Lair of Dreams by Libba Bray. This is the second book in the Diviners series. Series is set in the 1920s and it follows this group of people who are called diviners. That means they have magical powers and they are trying to save the world because there is some danger afoot. This second book, I really enjoyed it, but not as much as the first one. The first one I gave a solid 5-star, really loved it. This one is only a 4-star read for me. Well, I think the writing was great and particularly the audiobook just blows me away. And I really love these characters to death and just think they are so fun to spend time with and just humorous. They're funny. My biggest problem is I didn't like the plot of this one as much. I felt like it was a lot lower stakes than the first one for some reason. This one's definitely kind of building to a larger arc that I think is going to take place over the next 2 books, but this one in particular, I just didn't love it as much, you know? I wanted more from it. I wanted it to be more exciting. I think the overarching plot to be more clear instead of kind of just one new villain to fight in this book. You know, I don't know. I was expecting a little bit more from this one, but I still really loved it. A strong 4-star rating from this one. All right, now we are down to my top 3. I was really debating the positions of 2 and 3. I feel like I should probably put this one second, but I liked the book in second better, so I'm okay, whatever. In third place is A Restless Truth by Freya Marksey. This is the second book in her The Last Binding trilogy, and this book follows Maud, who is Robin's sister from the first book, which is called A Marvelous Light, and I read it in my Queer SFF reading vlog. If you haven't seen that, I want to check that out and my thoughts on that book. But this book is the follow-up. Maud is going on a ship journey from New York back to England to return to her home and her brother, but her traveling companion ends up getting murdered in the first chapter. Her traveling companion is the holder of a piece of the last contract, which all of these evil people in England are after, because if they can reunite the 3 pieces of the last contract, they can control all the magic in Britain. So that is their goal. They are trying to do that. Robin and Edwin and Maud, though, are trying to prevent this from happening, so that's why Maud was traveling with Elizabeth. But now that Elizabeth has been murdered and the pieces of the last contract stolen, which Maud has no idea what they even are, Maud must solve this mystery of who murdered her, who stole the objects, and must get those objects back before they arrive in England. So Maud enlists the help of Hawthorne and Violet to help her solve this mystery, and along the way, Maud discovers a lot about herself, namely that she is possibly in love with Violet. There's so much to love about this book. It's so fun, and I love the writing style. It's so great, and there's just so much going on in this book. Like, it's historical, it's fantasy, there's magic, there's romance. It's got everything you could possibly want. I also really liked the expansion of the magic system, as well as the expansion of like the overarching plot of the story. I think it's like very exciting, and it does feel high stakes because that's scary if someone could control all of the magic and like draw on power from everyone. Crazy. But I will say I didn't love this one quite as much as the first, and the main reason is the romance. While there is romance between Violet and Maud, this is a little bit spoilery, but not really. It's not like a puzzle piece soulmate romance like the first one was. This is more of like, I don't know, like a first love, like an exploration, like an exploratory kind of thing. It doesn't feel inevitable or like soul searing like I want it to. Like, whenever I read a romance, I want to read a soulmate, you're the only one for me kind of romance, and that wasn't what this was. And Maud's very young, she's only 19, so I understand why that was the direction this book went in, and it is realistic, but I don't want realistic, I want romance. That was the reason why this one only got 4 stars for me, but that's a personal thing for me, you know, whereas like as a whole, like I think this book is great and I think everyone should read it. It was marvelous, marvelous. The next book on my list is Disciplinary Action by Only James. This is another age gap daddy kink romance, but this is the creme de la creme of age gap daddy kink romance. So honestly, I'm not even ashamed to put it second because it really was that good. I loved this book. This book has kind of a convoluted, unrealistic plotline, but I'm gonna do my best to explain it. This book follows Gideon and Callum. Gideon is a man who hires prostitutes every once in a while, but he never sleeps with the same boy twice. Callum needs some quick money, so his friend sets him up with this gig to have sex with Gideon, and he goes to spend one night with Daddy Gideon. But Daddy Gideon blows Callum's mind, so Callum cannot just settle for one night. So when Gideon appears as Callum's headmaster at his school, he's like, I'm gonna blackmail this man into spending the next 6 weeks with me until I graduate. But he really doesn't have to blackmail him because Gideon is very much on board with this plan. He has not stopped thinking about Callum either. Thus begins their relationship, their romance, their arrangement. This book is definitely very, very smutty, but it's so wonderful, and this is definitely a puzzle piece soulmate romance, which I loved. And it definitely is very fluffy. It has like heart comfort in it, BDSM elements. I don't know. For what it was, it is literally the best. Chef's kiss. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. It's not a 5-star book. It's not even probably the best written book like this, but I loved it so much. And Only James' writing style just works for me. Her characters work for me. Her dynamics work for me. And I just loved this book. I just thought it was great. So I gave it 5 stars, and it is the second best book that I read in November. Did you guess my favorite book of the month? I'm sure if you've been on my channel before, you probably had an inkling of it. But my favorite book of November is Ocean's Echo by Everina Maxwell. This is a companion novel to Winter's Orbit, which is one of my favorite books of 2022 so far. And this one was definitely a great follow-up, and I loved it so much. This book follows Tennille and Surratt. Tennille is kind of like the rebellious nephew of the legislator of this country, and she's sick of dealing with his shit. So she ships him off to the army and says, you're gonna be synced. And what syncing means is Tennille is a reader, which means he can read other people's thoughts and emotions. This is very like taboo in this world because he can like get at secrets and things that he shouldn't know. When his aunt declares him to be synced, he must be synced with an architect. And architects in this world have the power to write other people, meaning that they can write commands for them that must be followed, like a compulsion kind of thing. And so when an architect and a reader are synced, the architect can control the reader and have like direct access to their mind kind of thing. So Surratt ends up being the person that Tennille is supposed to be synced to, but when Surratt finds out that Tennille is there not of his own accord, against his will, does not want to be synced, morality rises up within him and he's like, I will not be doing this. So they decide to fake being synced so they can both survive and find out a way for Tennille to escape. When this book was first announced and I read the description, I was so excited. The soul bond trope is one of my favorites of all time, and unfortunately I think I hyped it up too much in my head that that's what this was going to be, because it wasn't. The syncing was actually like a bad thing throughout the whole book, which I was sad about. I love a good like soul bond trope moment, and I really wanted this to be the traditionally published version of that, and it just wasn't. So I had the wrong expectations going into it, which is why I think I ended up liking this one less than Winter's Orbit. But that's not to say I didn't love it. Like, I thought it was a great book. Tennille is like the best character ever. I am obsessed with him. He is just my type of guy. I like him damaged. I like him rebellious. I like the bad boy. So Tennille was just great. I loved him. And the writing in this story is so good. I wouldn't consider myself a huge like sci-fi, space opera, fantasy, politics kind of gal, but I don't know. I love this book, and I loved Winter's Orbit for the same reasons. I just thought it was good. I can't help but compare it to Winter's Orbit though, and this one definitely had a lot less romance in it. It took a lot longer for Tennille and Surratt to kind of come to terms with their feelings for one another, and not really a lot happened between them, even less so than in Winter's Orbit. I did kind of want more romance from this one. I wanted Tennille and Surratt to be together longer and more on page. That's why this one got 4.5 stars and is not a 5-star book for me. Even though it should be a 5-star, whereas Winter's Orbit is like 6 stars, you know, but I don't know. I loved it. a lot. I just wanted more 10 insert, 4.5, but my favorite book of the month. All right, and that was a lot longer than I wanted it to be, but that is my November wrap up. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for being here for the first day of Bookmas. Definitely subscribe down below for 31 days of content. Please hold me to it. And if you've made it this far in the video, leave me a Christmas tree emoji for Bookmas. That's going to be the emoji of the month. So every video, you can leave that down below. Even if you add it to your watch later, I would appreciate it. But yes, like this video if you liked it. Check the description down below for links to all the books that I talked about, as well as links to my social media. I'm most active on Instagram and Goodreads other than YouTube. And I think that is all from me today. So thank you so much, and I will see you in my next video tomorrow. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, bye.